It doesn't rain much in this arid region of Patagonia, especially not in March and April. So when 400 millimeters fell in 3 days, more than normally falls in several years, Comodoro Rivadavia wasn't prepared. And although the sun has returned, it's still in shock.
When the storm began, we got all this mud. Then the wind blew the windows in and all got inside. I was lucky to save my child before all was buried under 1.5 meters of mud in 10-15 minutes.
Just one person died, but many have lost everything. Relief supplies from all over Argentina and beyond help alleviate the suffering. Heavy machinery and hundreds of troops are working to get the city back on its feet.
The army rescue operation is over. We're now focusing on reorganising and rebuilding the neighbourhoods, getting rid of the mud, taking water from houses so people can return to their homes.
Sparse vegetation on the hillsides overlooking this coastal city couldn't stop torrents of rain-sodden mud flowing through streets, wreaking devastation in its wake. The water has receded, but this damage remains. As the clean-up and repair operation continues, there are huge questions hanging over this city. What on earth happened and why? And what needs to be done to prevent it from happening again? Aldo Sanchez from the local weather station has the meteorological explanation. Unusually high humidity clashing with areas of deep low pressure. The same weather pattern that caused flooding in northern Argentina. He suggests other key factors also played a part.
This was possibly an extraordinary phenomenon in this area, but climate change could make them more frequent, causing flooding or drought.
Comodoro Rivadavia is Argentina's oil capital, a city where many come to make money but don't stay, don't invest in the future. Some locals blame the devastation on years of corruption and underinvestment in infrastructure.
The money collected for public works never stays here to benefit the city. It's taken to the provincial capital or goes to who knows where. But we are always the last, and what they do is poor quality.
The storm was like nothing this city had ever seen. As the people of Comodoro Rivadavia rebuild their lives, they're wondering whether it might happen again, knowing that if it does, they won't be prepared. Daniel Schweimler, Al Jazeera, Comodoro Rivadavia, southern Argentina.
New Zealand's civil defense authorities lifted severe weather warnings in the country on Friday after tropical cyclone Cook moved off the country's South Island. However, meteorological services cautioned the effects of the storm would still be felt in some areas. The cyclone, which was the second big storm to hit the country in a week, prompted authorities to evacuate seaside areas and close more than 100 schools on Thursday. The storm caused widespread power outages and landslides, with roads closed and air travel disrupted.
Stranded in the desert, these Somalis walked long distances under the scorching sun to reach this area, far from the danger of armed groups. They are nomads who rely on their livestock for their survival. But drought has killed cattle, goats and sheep. Parents are left with nothing to feed their children. Malnutrition is hitting hard.
I came here with 250 goats. All of them are dead except for 2. I have 7 children who I'm struggling to feed and am forced to give them black tea without milk, as all the animals I use to milk are dead.
The UN is worried 20 million people could face starvation in many African countries and Yemen, a region suffering from drought and armed conflicts that have displaced millions of people. Thousands of South Sudanese have fled into neighboring Uganda, caught in a cycle of violence that shows no signs of letting up, facing hunger and the daily threats of armed gangs. Entire villages were abandoned in South Sudan.
The soldiers were looting, breaking doors and beating people. They would arrest you and ask you to show them where the rebels are. But when you tell them you don't know, they beat you. They killed people.
Yemen is another country battered by war. Thousands of people have been killed, many others forced out of their homes. As fighting continues, supplies in food and medicine are running out, and starvation is again a major threat.
There is significant famine. There is people dying because of lack of medical attention. There are people who are simply out of schools simply because the schools are being used as shelters for displaced people.
But as the humanitarian crisis expands, aid agencies are cutting food rations to cope with the growing demands. Demands that are likely to continue in places like northeast Nigeria, where thousands of people leave areas under Boko Haram control. The UN warns unless local communities feel secure, the region might face an unprecedented exodus of the displaced. Hashim Al-Bara, Al Jazeera.
The United Nations is now warning that the risk of mass starvation in Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia and Yemen is rising rapidly. It says about 20 million people are living in areas where harvests have failed, which means malnutrition rates are increasing. In South Sudan alone, 1 million people are on the brink of starvation. The UN had appealed for $4.4 billion in aid for the 4 countries. But to date, it's only received about 21% of that amount. The world body is now calling for more funds to be released to alleviate that crisis.
If you look just at the Horn of Africa crisis of 2011, 260,000 lives were lost during that crisis. What we want at all costs is to avoid a repeat of that kind of cataclysmic loss of life. It is, to come back to my point, what has to happen now is that funding has to come in so that the humanitarian effort can try its best to do something about this situation, but already it is very late.
Now, Somalia is one of the 4 most affected countries, and let's get some insights into the situation there from Mohammed Sheikh Ali Ahmed. He's an Islamic speaker, life coach and humanitarian currently involved in efforts to help curb the famine in Somalia. Sheikh Ali Ahmed, thank you very much for joining us on Africa Live. Now, the UN paints quite a grim picture of an escalating food crisis in Somalia. Is that a situation where you have witnessed on the ground?
Well, the situation's pretty grim, and more so because the rains are yet to come in full force. But also it's so hard still to have access and reach people that are stranded in places that are very, very far away. Insecurity is a big contributor to that, but there are also other reasons why it's so hard to reach people that need perhaps the most help. But the make it or break it really is going to be what happens on the 15th of this month. That's 4 days away from today, because that's when the rainy season is supposed to start. If it starts the rain in the middle of April or even the end of April, it's supposed to go on until June or so. And even if it rains, people would need about 2-3 months to be able to harvest what they had planted in their farms. If it doesn't rain, I'm very afraid, God forbid that happens, but I'm afraid that this would be a much bigger catastrophe than anybody can imagine.
So you're talking about an impending catastrophe if it doesn't rain there, Sheikh Ali Ahmed. But what in your view needs to be done, though, to avoid this crisis escalating into what you're terming a catastrophe?
Well, you know what, I'll tell you what. I'm very content with the response given to this and the priority that this is made by so many people from a national and international, Somali and non-Somali respect, to be quite frank. If you look at the UN agencies, if you look at bilateral donor countries, the US, the EU, Sweden, Norway, the UK, the Organization of Islamic Conference just had a meeting today here in Mogadishu. But also the other independent initiatives that I spoke about a month ago when I was here. Awi Walal is one of them. There are young volunteers, young Somali volunteers coming together to try to map the problems so that help could get to people quicker. There are the Somali diaspora communities in the world are also coming together. For example, one community in Norway raised more than $124,000 in a few days or so. In Minnesota, in the U.S., they had what they call Dine Out for Somalia Day yesterday, where all of the restaurants were to donate 50% of their profits to help the famine campaign in Somalia. I'm content in that regard, but I think what really needs to happen is a better aid structure. There are so many people who want to volunteer. They should be directed. The Somali government's National Drought Committee needs to be more effective, more robust, and use younger people more. And as a Muslim country, of course, we pray to God because we believe that poverty and prosperity both come from Him. So we do a lot more prayers while we do the work at the same time.
All right, Mohammed Sheikh Ali Ahmed joining us there from Mogadishu. Thank you.
More than 100 wildfires are burning in and around Florida, and the state is expecting a difficult fire season ahead. Yesterday, the governor declared a state of emergency there. William Brangham has the latest.
Over 70,000 acres have burned across the state since February, and the fires are not just in one spot. They're located in all corners of the state. This is also occurring while Florida is dealing with a major drought. Jim Carls is the director of the Florida Forest Service and a 32-year veteran of fighting fires. He joins us from Tallahassee. Welcome to the NewsHour. Jim, I wonder if you could just give us a sense of how things are in Florida right now.
Dry. The peninsula of Florida is especially south and central Florida, is extremely dry right now, and it's drying out as you go north all the way to the Georgia-Florida line.
We mentioned that you're also dealing with a drought at the same time. How much is that a contributing factor to all this?
A big contributing factor in that, you know, we had some late freezes. Didn't have much of a winter here in Florida, but we did have a freeze late into February, early March, and it went down to south central Florida. And then it really didn't rain after that. So you got that dried vegetation, you got low rainfalls for really since about January, kind of a La Nina effect that we tend to get every few years in Florida. And now we're into our normally dry season, April, May, parts of Florida, early June, where we're normally dry anyway. And that increases the whole situation where it makes it very easy for fire to start, makes it very easy to fire spread.
This is still the beginning of your fire season. Do you have any sense of what the longer-term forecast is? What does it look like coming down the road?
Well, we got a couple forecasts out of our National Fire Center in Boise, and that pretty much paints a red target on Florida probably through April, May, and June. The NOAA forecasts show the drought expanding in some parts of the state into the same period, into April, May, and June. That's normally our dry period, along with how dry we already are. It really paints a picture that we've got a pretty intense fire season in front of us. We are very busy already. We're busy early, and we're drier than normal early as it is in early April right now. And we really expect to probably have to fight fire all the way to June, maybe even July. And it tends to move up the states. Our worst right now is South Florida. It moves to Central Florida, and then it moves to North Florida as it kind of closes out our fire seasons.
And over 100 fires, can you give us a sense of what is causing so many different simultaneous fires?
Well, right now the majority of our fires are human caused, probably 90% of them. Varies different things. Some of it is yard trash burning, where people are cleaning, spring cleaning, and they're burning their leaves. Some of it is vehicles, catalytic converters, that type, or equipment working in the woods or the wildlands. Some of it is arson, incendiary, have some issues with that. And then this past weekend we got some lightning, so we're starting to see the lightning fires evolve as well.
Most Americans think of fires out west in the very dry brush and forest land we see out there, but I understand that the type of vegetation that's burning and the way it burns in Florida is quite different.
It is. Fire evolved under fire, so it was constant fire prior to humans, and the vegetation tends to be more waxy, more resinous. What we say is in Florida, green burns. That's different than the West. The West, the fuels tend to be very cured, very dry, very essentially dead. Where down here, you come in here and you look at our vegetation, you think that's not going to burn, and it's just the opposite. And then it burns under a lot higher humidity. Our fires can burn very intensely, all the way up to 40 and 50% humidity. In the West, it tends to be 20% or below.
With all these different fires across the state, what is the danger to the human population?
As you know, Florida's got a big population, about 20 million people, so just about every fire we have impacts what we call the urban interface, or homes, structures. And so far this year, we've evacuated over 1,800 homes. We lost 27, so we saved a lot, impacted a good number of people in their daily lives from the wildfires. And the other thing in Florida that it really experiences is the impact on the roadways. We get smoke on the highways. With all those people and with a lot of tourists moving through the state, the roads become dangerous when the visibility gets down low.
All right, Jim Karls of the Florida Forest Service, thank you very much, and good luck down there.
Thank you.
So it's only April, and wildfires in the U.S. have already burned 2 million acres. Now that is more than 4 times the average in the same period. Now you're probably wondering, where have the bad spots been this year? So the epicenter has been the stretch from Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas, but also the Carolinas and Florida. About 77% of the acreage burn this year has occurred in these spots. So strong winds, dry weather in March, of course, that fed a lot of that destructive activity, and there were unfortunately 6 people who lost their lives in those fires.